All right, just gonna give everyone 2 more minutes and then we will begin. Hi, good evening, everyone. So I will be sharing my screen momentarily. Yeah. And should be good to go. All right. So let me make this bigger for everyone to see. So welcome to yet another community outreach session. Today, we're going to be having a very special guest, and that guest, as you can see, is Glen Henry. All right, so I look forward to hearing his story, hearing about how he founded SpriteWrench Studios, and much more. So here's our agenda, the welcome, objectives, recap of some events, introduction of speakers, upcoming past events, and, quick wrap up. The Jamaican developers community. What is our objectives, So the community aims to strengthen the development of skills of Jamaicans. We're geared towards training developers properly build and market their solutions from an idea to production. There are some brilliant developers out there, but they don't know how to really market themselves properly, or they don't have certain social skills to really get the job done. Right? So that is a big problem. So the community wants to, build up our developers, give them whatever knowledge that they need and, help them to get where they can go so they can become the best that they want to be. The problems that we're facing, companies can't find developers may not have a certain expertise, the lack of awareness, right? The status quo of being in technology. So, we're facing quite a major issue. And it's something we've heard from employers as well, right? All right, so recap of some past events. Recently, on the weekend, I had a pleasure of attending Senior Dev Connect, which was co-sponsored by Grid Dynamics. We got to hear about how big Grid Dynamics is. It's in 19 plus countries. We hear about what they require for you to become a top tier developer, right? One of the things I found really interesting was that they have this thing in Grid Dynamics called a T7, which is a distinguished engineer. That's as high as it gets. And the T7 is basically the global expert. There's only a few of them in the company, really. We also had the story of Matthew Stone, where we learned about the Jaya law bot. Right? So if you ever had trouble, figuring out complex Jamaican laws, you can go and talk to the Jaya law bots, sorry, and it will be able to answer your questions in basic English. All right. Who is Glen Henry? So Glen Henry is a one-man army, right? He's the founder of SpriteWrench Studios, an indie game company. Glen is also the founder of the Jamaica Game Developers Society. He spent some of his time attending game developer conferences all over the world. Wow. Glen has a Master of Business Administration from the Mona School of and a Bachelor of Applied Sciences from the UE, Mona. He has a cool YouTube channel where he posts game announcements and trailers. You can check out games made by Glen, such as Dream and Tonic on Steam. So Glen, over to you.
Evening, everyone. Thank you to the Jamaica developer community for having me this evening. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. So, as already said, I'm the face and finish behind SpriteWrench Studios, which is a independent game development business based out of here, Kingston, Jamaica. And I've been puttering about in and around games for the past, a little over 10 years at this point in time. I first got the indie dev bug in my first year at UWI. At that point in time, there was a documentary that was going around called Indie Game the Movie, which showcased and documented a renaissance that was happening in the industry at the time, which is a lot of the gatekeepers and the platforms that, you know, put games out, specifically Steam, they were relaxing some of the requirements to get onto the platform. We saw a lot more smaller experimental projects come out. We saw teams that, you know, weren't necessarily following the traditional model of what we call AAA. And when I say AAA, I'm referring to the big box titles such as your Grand Theft Autos, your Assassin's Creed. You saw instead smaller fun projects, for example, like Super Meat Boy or Mellow coming out of Australia. Or even, I think one of them in the documentary was also Fez. Again, these are smaller people who are very passionate about games and wanted to put their work out there and explore the medium in ways that AAA did not necessarily allow. Seeing that inspired me to kind of just get started. What I found between my friends and myself at the time was that we all believed that in order to make games, we need to finish our degree and migrate and go abroad, apply for a job, and become another cog in the wheel after a fashion. That documentary and the conversations and the communities that kind of sprung up around it and leading up to it inspired me to kind of just learn how to make games, and learn about the process. That's what inspired me to kind of pick up XNA, which was a framework at the time, put out by Microsoft for getting games on their Xbox arcade platform. And kind of just learn by file, trial by file. I quickly learned that game development is its own unique discipline, apart from traditional software. A lot of the considerations and rigor that we think of in standard applications don't necessarily apply, or they apply in a different context. Over the years, I've learned that game design itself is this kind of ephemeral, how do I say this, element that doesn't get as much of a spotlight as it really should. And I grew to appreciate that in these artists, these authors that are trying to, you know, make something new, innovative, and brilliant are really at the forefront of what we can call like innovation in the game design space. So with that said, and that drive and that flame lit within me, I kind of bugged and met a bunch of other people, friends such as Graham Reed, Zane Francis, Robert Morrison, and eventually we kind of became the Jamaica Game Developers Society, JGDS. It does not roll off the tongue, apologies, but it is who we are, which is a grassroots group of, at this point, self-identified nerds who are dedicated to learning more about the business and craft of interactive media. Now, we started, I think, approximately 2013, and the chief activity that we kind of congregated around was the Global Game Jam, which is a global hackathon dedicated to making games in 72 hours around a central theme. It's the largest hackathon of that type. So we've been doing that for a while. Eventually, we grew to start partnering with CarryMac at UWI, and every year we've been able to, by hook or crook, host with that support the Global Game Jam Jamaica Jam Site, the Jamaica chapter. We've seen a lot of people come in, build very, very cool projects, and grow from that experience, or take a lot from that experience. A couple of people have returned multiple times at this point and kind of grown into the community. Now, my business specifically has kind of grown from trying to figure out how to make games into how to make games in a sustainable way. There are many factors attached to that. Coming from a third world country, we don't necessarily have the industry spotlight or the capital support to kind of build the projects that you would want. So we have to get a little bit creative and a little bit scrappy with some of the projects. What that means is that a lot of the people in the community are wearing multiple hats. People are programmer, designer, producer, project manager, audio engineer, etc. And one of the benefits of having this community kind of coalesce and form is that we don't have to wear as many. We have people who focus on audio, and I can approach them to say, hey, how does this sound? And they can come in and vet or give an idea on certain things. We're able to share our progress and get feedback. And it has kind of grown into a tight-knit group of people who meet every other week, kind of shoot the breeze, talk about what they're working on, and share their gripes about what's happening. But in the game industry, both as a consumer and somebody who plays games, as well as a practitioner, a participant of the industry as a whole. Personally, SpriteWrench grew out from my desire of trying to turn this into a I am a computer scientist by trade. Like that was my first degree. I spent many years working as an IT officer and eventually as a technical manager, all the while chipping away and honing my skills with the projects for SpriteWrench. Eventually formalized that, and it has now turned into a studio in which I put out my creative projects as well as contract production and project management services. Yeah, so that is a long rambling tale of where SpriteWrench is, what SpriteWrench is and where we are now. I use we in the real sense because yes, I am the principal creator on a lot of the projects, but I could not do it alone, not without the support of the community and the support of other contractors and persons that I would have, met and networked with over the period. Yeah, I think that should be the end of my ramble right now in terms of background. Hand it over to the team for any other questions or any points of clarification.
All right. So the first thing would be, your first video game. Like, can you tell us about that? What was it called? Do you remember it? What did you use to make it? Did you actually publish it somewhere?
Oh, wow. So my very, very, very first commercially published game was called Mage. It was M@GE. I had published it originally on Gumroad back in the day, and I believe that it's still available on itch.io. Yes, still available on itch.io. So I can share the links after this session and you can check it out and play it. It was developed in Java. At the time, I wanted to port over the framework, XNA framework that I had mentioned, into Java, which is what I was learning across my first year and second year at UE, and see what that experience was like. So recreated the game loop structure, recreated the methods around that, recreated collision detection, and etc. The game itself is a puzzle platformer where you're trying to solve these puzzles by transmuting elements and things like that. It is very simple, very basic. I learned a lot during the time but I also learned that there was a lot I did not know. Yeah.
That would of course lead to actually no, go ahead first.
Sorry, no, that was just a belch. Yeah, I would have released it on itch.io. That's a website for a bunch of indie games. A bunch of cool projects are on there. I encourage everyone to check it out if you're not familiar.
Oh, make sure to post the link in the chat if you can.
All right.
All right, so then that would then lead to my follow-up question is, is there anything you regret, anything you'd have done differently?
I mean, the biggest regret I probably have right now is my second game after Mage was called Shiny Gauntlet. I spent too long working on it. When you're just getting into games and you're learning about, how to make a game, how to make an interactive experience, it's very easy to get tied up on the technical aspect. Like I mentioned, it is a different beast from traditional software. While some of the conventions about building clear and cohesive and comprehensive code would be ideal, that does not necessarily lend itself well to some of the iterative processes that are needed through game design. What I mean by this is you might have an idea for a feature, you might have it fully fleshed out in your mind, but when you put it in front of players, they come back to you with completely different, a different experience from what you're expecting. And as a result, you kind of have to structure your development process around like the idea that your assumptions are incorrect. You might have an idea, you might have something that you feel is really fun and is really great, but until it gets into the hands of the player, you cannot be sure. And as a result, you can't make a bunch of decisions on these assumed stances, right? So the regret that I would have had is the second project, Shiny Gauntlet. I spent something up close to 2-3 years working on that, and I probably should have spent 6 months. And as a result, I did not I plateaued in terms of what I was taking away from that project relatively early on. For your first game, you kind of want to get it out as soon as possible to get that feedback, to learn what shipping feels like in terms of like releasing a project, what that process is, what feedback you can expect from players, and how that feedback can affect you mentally, because that is a part of it as well. Because it is, when you're working on a game, it's a piece of art, really and truthfully, and more often than not, it is something that is close to you. So getting through that and learning from that as soon as possible is what I would give as advice to any new game devs.
All right, so we do have some questions in the chat, but before you go to those questions, let me just ask you, let's say that I want to own a Markex, for example, right? Would game development make me enough money to purchase that book?
Sorry?
Now, I was saying that we have some questions in the chat, right? But
Mhm.
let's say that I want to own a Markex. Can game development, generate enough money so that I can purchase that Markex?
So there is money in games. But that how to access that money has changed quite a lot in the last 2-3 years. Part of the challenge right now is working towards sustainability as an independent developer. Truthfully, if I was going to give advice in terms of like getting into game development, if you're getting into it for the money, I would say no, don't. There are enough challenges right now in the market, in the process, that unless you are already so inclined or you already have that you've been bitten by the bug and you're going to make games anyway, there are easier ways to make money. That said, it's not to say that, game development itself is not fulfilling, can't be fulfilling. I strongly believe that there is a path to sustainability within games, especially for the Caribbean, because we are uniquely positioned in terms of our cost of living. It's not necessarily as exorbitant as, our competitors in the States. We're we're mostly English speaking, so we can operate very efficiently as an outsourcing hub. And as the industry moves towards like reducing costs as much as possible, I do think there are opportunities that can crop up for scrappy entrepreneurs, specifically within game. So that would be my answer to that specific question. Is there money in games? Yes. Accessing it is tricky. If you're getting into games only for money, no. But if you really, really want to make games, there are opportunities there if you are savvy and navigate the turbulent waters accordingly.
All right, can you look in the comment section and go through some of the questions?
All right, cool. How can one join the JGDS? If you go to jgds.org, we have a link to our Discord right there. You should also see some images from past hackathons and projects from past hackathons. Feel free to join. Just make sure to agree to the rules, and I hope I see people there. Which language would you recommend for starting gaming? I believe the default standard right now is assumed C#. A bunch of the engines that are being used right now are going to be Unity, Unreal, and Godot, and I believe all of them are some flavor of C# in terms of scripting. But they do have their variations of visual programming, visual structure as well. Scrolling down a bit. Next one. How many members are in the JGDS? Right now, we are a little over 500, with about 10 to 15 members pretty active and conversant in the group. Has anyone from me made games? Yes, many people in the group at this point have made a couple games. Graham Reed, who I would have mentioned earlier, made Super Space Club, as well as Hecticute on Android back in the day. Super Space Club just recently was I think it's still their free week right now on Epic Game Store, so you can go ahead and check it out. That's made by a Jamaican developer based out of New York right now, as well as a couple other developers who have released on the Apple Arcade. So you can check that out as well. What's my favorite game? I'm going to pin that one. That's a loaded question. I'm not going into it right now. When is the next hackathon? So the Global Game Jam itself is an annual event. The next one will be in 2026. It is normally the last week in February. That's when we host it, in partnership with CARIMAC and their event planning course. So look out for communication around that. You can check our social media on Twitter as well as Instagram for information thereof. Can I become wealthy if I build games? Maybe. Answer that question. Is this dream still alive? Yes, but everybody is trying. These are not the best time for any business, really, any small business right now, but there still remains opportunities. I mentioned the Epic Game Store free week for Super Space Club. That was an opportunity that is, there are other opportunities like that that are available, and other funding opportunities that are popping up all the time. So you can check it out. Yeah, ping me if you want some examples of our. Can Jamaica make it big with video games? Like have a large game dev studios here? Can games become a big contributor to the GDP? Loaded question. I want to say yes, but like any other entertainment sector, we do need to have support, institutional support, meaning tax exemptions and things to that extent. The challenge right now is proving to key stakeholders that there is, viability here. And fortunately, like many other entertainment sectors, gaming is a hit-driven business, meaning you only really pay attention to the ones that are exceedingly successful. However, there are a bunch of businesses studios that exist and have existed globally that are making reasonable successes. They're making moderate revenue and income to support themselves, to support their families, and to continue making games, which in my personal opinion, is far more impressive than launching a huge big names title and then not making a second game. Right? I would love to have a sustainable game industry in the Caribbean that has people putting out their second, their third, their fourth, their fifth games, regardless of size, continuously, and doing it in a way that doesn't see them taking on undue risk and allows them to explore what it means to be a game developer and game designer in the Caribbean. I'm personally passionate about that. Which do you prefer, Microsoft, Nintendo, or Sony? So I grew up with Nintendo, so Nintendo does have a special place in my heart. Switch and Switch 2. I currently still have a Switch. I have not been able to secure a Switch 2 pre-order for the Switch 2. I'm actually waiting for a year for all those inevitable issues to pop up before I secure mine. And then in terms of order, Xbox, mostly because of their programs around supporting indies. Idea Xbox is a wonderful program. I've spoken to some of the people there, and I think that is an opportunity other devs from the Caribbean should explore. And then Sony, only because PS5 is a big ask for the past couple of years. What was the last event held by the JGDS? So JGDS, we have our virtual meetup fortnightly right now. It is really just a meeting where we all pile in on the Discord and just share what we've been working on, talk about news in the industry, and talk about things that have been happening. That is our primary event. We are trying to bring back some of our other second-tier flagship events, such as the Windies Direct, which we were able to host in 2022, which was a showcase of games made by devs from the Caribbean and the wider diaspora. We got coverage in Polygon and GameIndustry.biz. And yeah, it was a great time. We'd love to be able to bring that back and spotlight more games coming out of the region. And have I heard about Street Boy? Yes, I have, and I'm rooting for that team. The Pennycook brothers have been working on that game for a minute, and I can't wait to see where they are. How well does the nascent national animation policy support local game development? Still reviewing that, Mr. Peru. I'm still reviewing that policy right now. The challenge I have with most of the policies that are coming up around what was previously called the orange economy is that it tries to lump animation and game development together, or game design together. And unfortunately, they both have different strategies for growth. So I'm still going through that document with a fine-tooth comb to kind of see how best to articulate those differences. But at a high level, what I've noticed is that what the local animation industry needs in terms of support is more around like helping production costs, help with production costs and facilitating the creation of material and submission to outside festivals. In my own experience, what game devs need locally is prototyping funds or access to capital that would allow for quicker iteration or less risky iteration to land on cool ideas. Do I believe GTA 6 will be launching this lifetime? Yes. Even though the trailer, we just got the trailer, a new trailer from them today, from Rockstar today. I've been talking to a bunch of people about that. I do believe it will be launched next year. I think they'll hit that date. I think part of the challenge that they have right now is that there's a lot of economic instability with the current American administration, as well as how those policies impact the industry. So things like the Nintendo Switch prices, as the new game prices as well, which are now $80, and just the general shift in investment that's happening in the industry right now. So I think I've gone through a bunch of the questions. Anything else?
All right, so we're now at that segment, right? So there was something that you touched on a bit, right? But let's say that you would make your best case to leaders all over the Caribbean, right? What does the game development industry in the Caribbean really need to really push us to that height that we can reach, right? What's the best plea or message you send to them right now?
So if you put me in front of some of the stakeholders right now, I would say it is education, funding our own education. So that means equipping students who want to make games with the programs and the infrastructure to learn how to make them. I think Trinidad has a game design model coming out of UTT, currently taught by Sir Caiaphas Moore. That is really enviable, and it would be great if something similar happened in Jamaica. That basically equips students with ways to contribute at a global level. So that's one. And then the next pillar I would say is prototype funding. And when I say this, I'm specifically talking about funds that won't necessarily immediately generate a return. And I know that is a challenge given our situation. But when you look to other territories and other countries that are able to set things up, like specifically looking at Canada, they have the Canadian Media Fund. That allows a bunch of creatives to get funding, hire teams, and to make prototypes that go on to become full-fledged shipped projects. Now, they're also equipped with the judges and the support to kind of run through that process. And currently, that doesn't exist, to my knowledge, in Jamaica or the wider Caribbean. Our funding structures are not necessarily set up for that. There's either a lot of rigor around reporting that makes it really difficult to kind of position those projects properly. And when I say prototyping, it's normally going to be you are not even sure if the game is fun at that point. You are concepting the idea. And the point of the prototype funding is to figure out, is this fun, or if this small part of it's fun, how do I make it even more so? And we don't necessarily have a lot of avenues that allow devs to kind of explore that. So what happens is you're going to have people bootstrapping that in some way, either through contracts like myself, or contracting, like they're funding it themselves, or they are not able to move past that initial concept phase at all. That stops a lot of it. Funding from Chase to fund prototypes. I would need clarity. I'm seeing a question about funding from Chase for prototypes. I would need clarity on what Chase are you referring to specifically.
All right. So Craig, if you want, or if anybody wants to ask Glenn a question directly, you can raise your hand, and then I'll allow you to ask him the question. Craig, are you willing to ask the question verbally? All right. Okay, so he's in. All right, so I'm gonna one sec here. So while I'm sorting that out, Glenn, one of the things that we, and me in particular, because I actually did that game hackathon, that global one that you kept back when I was in university. I think my team won, and I was the lead on that team. I'd love to see, some major games to you actually coming out of the Caribbean, right? So talks like these are important for us, right? So what we really need is, what's needed to make this happen, such and such. And, of course, you are somebody in the field, you would have deeper knowledge on the problem, right? So hold on. Getting an issue here. Okay, I know what I'll go. Kurt, you're unmuted?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Glenn, wonderful to have you.
Yes.
So the Chase Fund is Chase stands for Culture, Health, Arts, Sports, Education Fund. It's the physical building is in New Kingston, and it's been in existence for a couple of decades now. It's a government of Jamaica entity, and the A in Chase is for art. So, for example, they've provided funding for Nadine Rawlins to go to she's currently abroad. I don't remember. There's some big event. Oh yes, it's the European Audio Visual Festival of some kind. So she's learning how to. Well, she's building her skills in terms of building films. And I think Chase might. Well, I'm wondering if you know whether they're willing to provide the kind of funding that you've been talking about for funding prototypes. Whether anyone's tried to access that kind of funding, or whether maybe it's just an unknown. Thanks.
So I'm not familiar with Chase at all. I'm looking at the link right now. But these type of opportunities are probably, it's the cursory glance seems like it is directly what I'm referring to, in terms of more opportunities like this. My experience is through the Ignite Big E initiative. And unfortunately, while that I'm very grateful for that opportunity, I found that is not necessarily exactly set up for games. There, that factor that I mentioned, the iterative factor, that unknown factor, is something that's going to be unique. And it is, in my experience, very hard to approach an entity and say, hey, I have an idea for a game. It will do X and Y and Z, but I'm not sure how it's going to look at the end and get funding. They normally want something a little bit more concrete, which unfortunately limits a bunch of the avenues. So to give an example, on a recent project, a recent pitch that I had, I'm working on a project called Sunken Stones. It's a puzzle strategy game. In 2024, I pitched the project to a bunch of publishers. 2024 was also the worst year to pitch a game to a bunch of publishers. But coming out of that feedback that I was getting from a couple of responses, I changed a very core feature of the game. So like in the process of pitching and getting feedback and things like that, a core element changed. Now, my experience with local entities is that would have been a challenge to navigate organizational wise. Like they gave you the money to build X. You cannot change X midway without a large amount of justification. So I would have to investigate Chase specifically, but when I'm talking about grants and opportunities, it would be more experimental, more exploratory grants. In the past, I've gotten a grant from a fund called the New Voice, Draknek New Voices, which was a bit of money and basically you submit a playable and the money was there. You just had to justify how you plan to do it, and that was it. It was very hands off. In my opinion, I don't think we're at the flexibility culturally to kind of facilitate something similar. I'm gonna share it in the chat.
I'm seeing. Oh, did you finish, Glenn?
Yeah, I'm finished. You can. I see O'Shane hands up.
Shane, go ahead. Oh, you're not able to unmute, O'Shane? All right. O'Shane,
I have a question while you figure out how to unmute Ocean. Is it that we're not yet mature in handling funds? Because I'm wondering if the reason we're having such challenges in getting funds and ensuring that there's a deliverable product that we stick to, based on their requirements, etc. Is it that they don't believe that the different entities that apply, etc., can manage their funds properly, and so they're going to be blowing through the money and don't actually deliver something?
So there are two sides to this. I do believe that we are culturally risk averse. But I understand why we are. We are part of the global south. We don't necessarily have a lot of capital free capital in the same way that our northern counterparts do. So I can understand why there's this rigor around our funding initiatives. But at the same time, I do believe that it does hamper how we apply, and it kind of translates the problem of why don't we have games or why don't we have X into, oh, they don't know how to apply or they don't know how to manage, and it transmutes the process from like execution, design, and development into one of education, which, while important, has shifted things. Like what I find is that you're gonna end up with a lot of initiatives that focus more on educating people on how to write proposals, how to manage their accounts, and etc. While those are important, doesn't lead to games or those creative projects. That is what my experience has been. But yeah.
All right. So following on Alden's question, what you're basically saying is that our region being poor is what's keeping us from being rich.
I mean, if you say it like that, it's more of I'm trying to find a very nice way or diplomatic way of rephrasing that question.
Well, I can cut out some of this now, so you can speak your heart out. I'm joking. It's live stream on YouTube, people.
It is.
Is it okay if I chime in a little bit here?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, evening, everyone. So what I wanted to mention when you first made the point, I think a part of it is also because we don't have the demonstrated experience of making games, then it's gonna be hard for an investor to say, okay, I'm willing to give you funds. Even if it's a government grant, you're not just gonna give the grant to anyone that comes asking. So a part of it, we also need some form of demonstrated experience. Like if you look at, say, developers, no, because we have institutions that are vested in software development in different aspects of IT, then the expertise is going out there. So you have all these firms overseas that they are hiring resources that are here. They get the expertise and they get it at a lesser cost, as if they, instead of hiring someone that's in the US, right? But for games, we don't have that. So it's gonna be hard. I believe it's hard for someone to willingly give or put up the capital to invest when I don't know if you can do what you're saying you're going to do.
Exactly. So that is exactly it. But the only way to build that aptitude is that prototyping phase. So this is not project investment. This is grants. This is programs like Chase at a Glance. This is programs like the Drapneck New Voices Puzzle Grant. These are funds that are made accessible to people to experiment and to build. So it's again,
right. But here's where I agree with that. Sorry to cut. Here's where I disagree with that. You have so many examples of low budget indie games that have I'm not saying trending or wildly successful, but they have showcased these individuals' talent and their creativity, and then that opened doors for them getting projects, or even gone on to say create an indie studio, and they've gotten projects outsourced by larger firms. So to zoom in on just the grants part, I think that's the lesser and more of the creative initiative is the need, is the majority that we need here, which
okay.
I think it's getting there. It's taking a long time.
Okay.
At least that's my opinion on it.
So I agree. So first off, I do agree. Well, first, before I dive into that, Craig, I see your hand has been up for a minute. Do you want to chime in?
Oh, well, I think you should respond to Shane first, and then I'll chime in.
Okay. So while I do agree with that statement, my comment was to frame what I'm saying contextually, is that proof stage, we can be there, but we're not there yet. And we kind of need to move through the stages first. So we need to have a robust ecosystem where people can build and experiment and not necessarily mortgage their homes on an idea, and then we can move into direct investment and such. That's the argument I'm trying to say. Like, we don't have an infrastructure in place where people are free to do that or encouraged to do that even. And you see that in place in foreign markets. You see that with the incubators, you see that with Silicon Valley, that there are structures in place to support people experimenting. You see that in place in Canada, the CMF fund I mentioned. You literally have funds that are set up for people to just prototype a thing. And the expectation at the end of it is that you just have a prototype. It's not a go-to-market strategy and a promise of 2x, 10x, or whatever on the investment. And what's happening, or what I've experienced, is that people are more focused on the investment phase and less on creating an ecosystem that will support people to be creative and innovative and build on that. So it's a staging thing. And then when it comes to proof in the market that these games exist, I agree. But it's also at the same time, you have to be very careful. Because for every success that you see, for every Expedition 33 that you see, there's 10 failures. or more that you never hear about. And it's not because their game is necessarily worse. It's not because their marketing is worse. It's just a confluence of circumstance that don't allow for them to get the space. Like, truthfully, example, it's a very specific example. A very specific example. But Polygon recently got sold. Polygon is a very large gaming outlet, primary gaming outlet, and leads to a lot of press coverage for games. They recently got sold to another entity, and a bunch of their staff got laid off. All right. As a result, going forward, the general attitude is that press coverage is gonna be a thing of the past. It was already on its way out, but it's dead. Now, with that gone, what avenue do devs have to get the word out about their games? Streamers. But that normally leverages existing relationships and, you know, other factors, because people don't necessarily stream unknown games. Like there's a kind of a network effect of you have to be big enough before everybody starts talking about you. So it's not a one-to-one. It's not a pure meritocracy. So to assume that just because they did it, other people can replicate it. What you need first is a fertile ecosystem that allows people to experiment, to take risks. Those models exist globally, and I would love to see that in the Caribbean. Yes, Craig.
Yeah, totally agree with everything you've just said, especially about, there being more than 10 failures for every success that we hear about. What I'd like to add is two things. First is elaborating on the point you just made. There is a huge difference between invention and innovation. And that's not a difference that's frequently understood or talked about in Jamaica. So you look at Ignite and Biggie, they're more on the innovation end of the spectrum, right? Where they want to help you get something to market and scale. You look at the University of the West Indies and other similar institutions, and they're more on the invention end. And what you've been talking about in terms of prototyping is more on the invention end. You're not going to come up with a business model. You just want to prove that something can work, right? From a technical point of view, unfortunately, there's almost no funding available for that in any sector in Jamaica, except maybe tourism, because there is a tourism innovation fund, right? But the minister, well, Nigel Clark, when he was Minister of Finance, before the pandemic, had promised there'd be a $200 million fund for the whole country for R&D. I mean, that is a drop in the bucket for what's needed. But across the entire Caribbean, this is a challenge that we have. We do not, the banks, the financial system, and business people, the management cadre, very rarely, and scientists even more so, very rarely understand the difference between invention and innovation, right? And there's no funding in the middle, right? So if you're at a university, you may have some funding for invention because that's part of the job of research institutions. If you get to the point where you've already got a business model going, you might be able to go to a large company or maybe a DBJ, and you get some funding for innovation, but there's no money in the middle. And if you're not at either of those, just salt, right? So I agree with you that the ecosystem, you need to build the ecosystem. That's one. The second point, I'll be very brief about it, is that it's not just gaming that you can't get funding for in Jamaica. The banking sector is extraordinarily risk averse. They will give you money to buy a car or a house because that's collateral that they understand readily, and it's fungible. They can sell it. It doesn't matter what kind of business you want to get into, almost any kind of business. There's very little funding available because they're so risk averse. So I'd say, look, this is not a battle that animation or gaming can win. you're going to have to ride on the coattails of all the other far more mature industries that are trying to get the capital markets more developed. I'd say don't try and fight that battle because it's, there so many other sectors have been trying to fight it for decades without much success. Thanks a lot.
All right. All right. Now then, I think a lot of important things were said, but you mentioned something interesting. I didn't think about Polygon. I think I read after their articles in the past. Aside from literal game developers, what other infrastructure around the whole ecosystem do you think is needed?
I mean, outside of direct funding,
Yeah, outside of direct funding.
I mentioned education as one of the key things, and that doesn't necessarily have to be traditional education in the terms of like classes on how to rig a 3D model or intro to game design 101, but network effects and like being part of the global conversation in the industry. I just found back an article I routinely end up going back to called done by Rami Ismail, who is an indie developer of some renown. He refers to he back in the day he traveled a lot to a bunch of nascent and developing game development communities, and he created a rubric of like 6 stages. I'll share that in the chat. But particularly for Jamaica, we are firmly about stage 3 on the cusp to stage 4. What stage 3 focuses on is international knowledge exchange. So that is sharing standards and expectations and things like that. And that's what we try to facilitate as much as possible through JGDS, through things like the Windies Direct, as well as our crash course series that we ran during 2020 and into 2021, where we invited global professionals to kind of just give micro talks to the community on various things, ranging from production to sound design to team management, things like that. They're available free for YouTube. I can share them accordingly. So we're very much stage 3, where we're sharing that knowledge. We're like, people are aware, at least in some part, of what the global game industry is from a business standpoint. Stage 4 is when a hero emerges, meaning locally we need our version of a Bob Marley. We need somebody to just come onto the scene and blow up real loud. And that will unlock, the assumption is that that will unlock a lot of the funding, the capital, the backing, the support that is needed to kind of flesh out and make this industry a real thing. Now, I said at the top of the talk that I don't want, I really would prefer to see studios exist in a way that's sustainable and maybe not necessarily all the money on their debut release, but make some on their first one, then make more on the second one, and then more on the third, and do that in a sustainable manner. Until somebody kind of launches into to get that critical and cultural and commercial acclaim. Like, those are 3 C's. If they get 2 of them, that's what we need. And then I think that at that point is where we will start to be kind of taken a bit more seriously and unlock a bunch of the barriers that I was mentioning earlier. Sharing that in the comments. Yeah. So that article I just shared from gamedeveloper.com, 6 stages of game dev community. I posit that we are stage 3.5 going into the cusp of 4.
All right. Seeing a question in the chat. If someone wants to test your games, how would they get the opportunity?
All my games are on Steam. You can check them out. If you want a free key, message me on shoot me an email at ghenry at SpriteWrench, or message me on Blue Sky. I'm pretty much on everything. SpriteWrench, that's Sprite like the soda, wrench like the tool. But yeah, I would encourage you to follow me on Steam, and that's where I'll share most of my projects and most of my games. I just posted the link in the chat.
All right. So my final question. Let's say somebody, came to you and said, Glenn, we've got X and Y $1 million here. We want you to be a part of this vehicle that's just going to be fully focused on game development and building out the game development ecosystem. Would you say yes to that?
I would still ask about who else is part of that vehicle. Because in order to get success or achieve success, you need to ensure that you have the proper support. Not just financially, but direction wise. It makes no sense to get all the money in the world, but the person who's giving it to you either is strongly opinionated on the direction of the project, and not know anything about the game or industry itself. I would very much prefer to have partners that, one, believe in, like, we're aligned on vision, and two, know enough about the industry to help us navigate it better. I don't want anybody to have bad deals. There are also a lot of bad deals that exist.
It sounds kind of personal. No comment. Good. All right. Thank you, Glenn. We're gonna be moving on. So if you have any questions, people just place them in the comment section. Glenn can look out for those. All right. So I am supposed to tell you about Shop Piazza. So Shop Piazza is being launched by the community's sister company. If you want to support what the community does, you can definitely check out Shop Piazza and get your developer jersey and have the item delivered to, I think it's Kingston and St. Catherine at the moment, right? So I'm gonna drop a link to Shop Piazza in the comment section. All right, there's the Shop Piazza link. We're back. Upcoming events, we have our physical event coming up, which hasn't been announced yet. Open mic sessions, community outreach, career days, demo days, and, a possible workshop event. We already had our Q&A session, and it was interesting, hearing from Glenn issues in the industry and just, how we can help make the industry better. You never know, Like, I feel like Jamaica has a lot of potential. It's just that you need the right infrastructure and ecosystem in place, really. So you can find the community on Meetup. I think this is old. Yeah, I think we're at 1,500 now. All right. So thank you all for attending. And of course, thank you, Glenn, as well, for taking the time out to present to us. And we shall see you at the next event. Bye.
Good, everyone. Thanks for having me.